Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
And once again, Into the Breach, we are pre-taping this time on Wednesday before our Monday air. So I guess we're going to run a major gamble, aren't we, Raymond?
Yes, we are.
And the major gamble is we're going to be talking a good bit about what's roiling the country right now and what's totally had the United States Senate totally going bonkers, and that's the Brett Kavanaugh nomination for a seat on the United States Supreme Court. And just to say the word Brett Kavanaugh in the same breath as United States Supreme Court is anathema to my tongue, but I said it. So, and that's not basically any political partisan. That's just as a journalist looking at all the stuff and all the stuff that has come out. And so the nature of the beast is, if they do not want to release documents about who this person is so people can do a real check on him, and they do not want to let the FBI go back into the background situation on who he actually might be, then it means they really are not in a search for truth. But Raymond, tell me a little bit about where you are on what you've dug up on.
Well, I'm wondering how many more so-called witnesses are going to come forward now. As you may know, a third party has emerged, the third woman who has made accusations about attending parties where there's been heavy drinking, sexual predation, I would call it. She has said that she has seen them boys at these parties, of which Kavanaugh and his roommate, Mr. Judge, have participated in activities of trying to get young ladies drunk and indeed having sex with them against their will in order of many people, not just one or two, but she said, the quote, to paraphrase her, because I don't have the quote right in front of me, but to paraphrase her, she has seen boys lined up outside of various rooms waiting for their turn, as she put it. I think that's kind of damning. Nobody except Obama, excuse me. I still think that he's my president. Unfortunately, he's not. No one except the current president and Mitch McConnell and Kavanaugh himself are denying this. And it's curious also because since this third party has come out, Mr. Orangehead has not said anything. He's made no comment about that, and it's uncharacteristic of him.
Made no comment about what?
About the third woman who has made accusations.
That is because he hasn't had time to ingest it and digest it and get on his Twitter feed and word. Because guess what? Tell people it's today, Wednesday.
It is today,
and Wednesday, when we're pre-taping, is the day that the young woman's attorney, one Michael Avenatti, whose name might resound to the general public because Michael Avenatti was the very competent lawyer who represented Stormy Daniels in the suit against the man you call the Orange Monster in the White House. And basically, Avenatti and his client got the Orange Monster guy in the White House to cry uncle and say, okay, yeah, you guys are right. And they refused to withdraw their suit because they had another suit for him on defamation of character or something to that effect. So Avenatti released the name today when we taped last Wednesday. When we air, it'll be last Wednesday, of a third young lady who, if we can call up the Huffington Post story, we could actually bring up her name.
Swetnick is her last name.
Is that the Huffington Post story? You know, if it's there, then
her first name is. What is her first name? It is. Forgive me, folks. Obviously, I'm not extremely prepared at the moment.
Well, actually, we called up the story before we went on the air, and lo and behold,
I'm not very good at remembering first names. I'm sorry, Mr. Tait.
Okay, so
Julie Swetnick.
All right, so if there's a quote on the Huffington Post article, we should actually read it for our viewers. So
I want to read the quote. Here, quote from Julie Swetnick. I have a firm recollection of seeing boys lined up outside of rooms at many of these parties waiting for their turn with a girl inside the room, she says. The boys included Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty damning.
Well, that's the statement.
That's her statement.
Okay. And the only individual right now, based on earlier reports and what we've seen and what's been reported by other individuals, is that the only person that's going to be allowed in the, quote, Thursday, which is last Thursday when you're seeing this, folk, investigation by the United States Senate of the original accuser of Brett Kavanaugh, which is Christine Blasey Ford, the professor.
Right.
Only Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh are going to be the two people in those chairs to be grilled by senators on the Democratic side.
Right.
The Democratic senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee will be taking their turns at questioning Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford. But on the Republican side, tell me if this is anything that you've ever seen before in your lifetime. The Republican senators are not going to be questioning
They're having a lawyer, an outside lawyer come in, and a female at that, because they think that that will soften the blow. I'm not so sure of that. I think that there are women that are just as right-wing as the men. It's probably Mitch McConnell's twin sister. I'm sorry for bringing up his name, but he really burns my bacon.
The female lawyer that they've hired is a lady by the name of Mitchell, who comes out of the state of Arizona and who was one of the sex crime prosecutors in the state of Arizona. And so for I believe her expertise on questioning victims of sex crimes in a way to elicit whatever she needed to elicit, she probably has a much more less accusatory way of approaching these individuals, which is why I'm sure
you would hope so.
I'm just saying that's the avowed reason that they've hired her and brought her in, because they don't want to be seen as supposedly,
well, you know me, I'm suspect of anything that they do. So, well, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, when is that?
Thursday, which is when we air, will have been last Thursday. When we air. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, because what Michael Avenatti, Julie Swetnick's attorney, has said, because I saw him on last, I believe, Tuesday night, Rachel Maddow's show on MSNBC, saying was that he specifically addressed the issue of what kinds of questions the Senate Judiciary Committee should be asking Brett Kavanaugh based on what the declaration that his client, Julie Swetnick, was prepared to put out there. And I believe it's a sworn declaration. And the bottom line is, it was a long list of questions dealing were you ever at parties where there was gang rape? Did you ever participate in gang rape? Were you ever in a situation where you were aiding and abetting gang rape? So these were the questions that he said he had thrown to the Senate Judiciary members, and with an eye towards them inviting his client to also be involved in the testimony before the open testimony before the full Senate Judiciary, that public hearing.
Right. Did you see Kavanaugh's interview on Fox News the other night, or hear anything about it?
I saw a clip from it.
He did not answer any question. All he kept saying is, "I'm hoping for a fair trial, fair proceedings." And that was his answer to everything, even when he was asked, well, did you, in fact, are you guilty of these charges? He said, all I'm doing is hoping for fair proceedings. So is he going to answer any questions specifically? Who knows?
Well,
and do we know what questions are going to be asked? I mean, we can assume there are, the obvious questions that will be asked, but have they released the questions?
There's no such thing as releasing questions ahead of time. You and I both know that. That's like us asking somebody we want to interview when they say, "Tell us what questions you're going to ask." That we can tell you what areas we're going to cover, but we're not going to tell you what questions we're going to ask. That's not going to happen.
I'm also surprised that they
but
haven't done that.
Avenatti did suggest certain
He has suggested
areas and questions, but I want to go back to what you were saying about her sworn declaration, and to quote it, because, and this is Swetnick, folks, Julie Swetnick, and I'm quoting from the Huffington Post article, because Huffington Post is a relatively reputable online source that we have quoted in the past, and they are actually quoting her declaration, so this should be seriously accurate. But in a sworn declaration, Swetnick, who is a Washington, D.C. resident, I didn't know that, right?
No.
Said she was, quote, a victim of one of these gang or train rapes. Not she saw or knew about, she was a victim
yes.
of one of these gang or train rapes where Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh were present. Full quote.
But she does not, we should point out that she does not involve
the quote is,
Kavanaugh
they were present.
in the rape. Yes.
They were present, okay? Now, to continue her quote, during the incident, I was incapacitated without my consent and unable to fight off the boys raping me, she said. I believe I was drugged using Quaaludes or something similar placed in what I was drinking. The other quote that's significant, I think, which is why I understand why they will not let the FBI go back and talk to all these people, because this is a very significant statement she says here. She was at well over 10 house parties between 1981 to 1983. And at those house parties, she says Judge and Kavanaugh, the two roommates, and others would attempt to spike the punch at those house parties with drugs and or grain alcohol so as to cause girls to lose their inhibitions and their ability to say no. Kavanaugh and Judge, she said, would, quote, target particular girls. It was usually a girl that was especially vulnerable because she was alone at the party or shy. And then she has a, quote, firm recollection of seeing boys, you quoted this before, including Judge and Kavanaugh, quote, lined up outside rooms at many of these parties, waiting for their turn with a girl inside the room. The Huffington Post immediately inserted, HuffPost has not independently corroborated these claims. Well, we can insert the fact that Media Watch has not independently corroborated these claims either. We're just bringing them to you from other news aggregates. But what we can speculate on, and between us,
is that.
Is there any reason why the FBI, which normally does these background checks, why they're not being asked to investigate all these allegations?
I don't understand why the GOP is saying, well, that's unprecedented, because it's not unprecedented.
Yeah. We all know they do background checks.
Absolutely.
They reopen background checks after they close them, and
so
evidently they speak with forked tongue about this is unprecedented, or no, that's already been done, so we're not going back there. So we've heard both lines come out of the Senate Judiciary Chairperson Chuck Grassley, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I have a question that's sort of related to this, and I should know the answer to it, but I do not. Now, a Supreme Court justice is for life. His term is for life. Is there any way that he can be removed from office if something should come up after he is, if he is confirmed?
You can impeach a Supreme Court judge just like you can impeach the President of the United States. That's the only way you can get him off the bench.
That's the only way you get him.
And a lot of individuals on the mainstream media talk shows have been speculating about the fact that if the GOP continues to ram this nomination through, and with all these number of people, all these women coming out of the woodwork, there is no statute of limitations on this stuff.
No.
And so,
there's not.
at least in certain states, there is not. I think in others there may be, but there's a very good possibility that this man, who we're gambling will not have been voted onto the bench when this airs next Monday, folks, when you're watching this, but we could be wrong. But if indeed he gets a thumbs up vote to be made a U.S. Supreme Court justice, down the road when somebody follows up on all these allegations and all these charges, we could find ourselves in a serious made-for-TV, worse reality TV show than the one we're experiencing right now with his confirmation when he comes up for impeachment. Okay?
That would be very interesting. I hope it doesn't get that far. I hope he never is in a position to be impeached.
There you go. So, in any event, I hope your clock is running because
It is.
good.
It is.
The interesting thing about the Kavanaugh nomination and these charges of rape and these allegations of sexual misconduct, actually, attempted rape is much worse than sexual misconduct. Okay,
Oh, no,
and
there's no comparison.
So when you start talking about gang rape,
Yeah.
and people aiding and abetting gang rape, usually you get tried as one of the rapists if you aid and abet a rape. So these are serious charges. There are a number of interesting reaction to this. The Sunday New York Times, a week ago Sunday, not the Sunday just passed that you'll be when we are airing this, the various opinion page section of the Sunday Review is just worth a quick perusal, just to call it off. Jennifer Weiner, an author, The Hungry Heart, and also a contributing opinion writer to the Sunday Opinion page. Her headline is, "The Patriarchy Will Always Have Its Revenge." Okay? And the thrust of this is, I was 21 years old in 1991, 6 weeks into my first full-time job when Anita Hill testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and I saw the way that things were going to be.
Yeah.
And basically, at the back end of this, she says something to the effect, it's somewhere in the middle.
Well, they
I
really,
knew-
they really roasted Anita Hill.
Yeah, well,
Boy.
one of the charges was, it can't be as bad as it was because she followed him from one job to another, they'd say. And this is Miss Weiner writing. She followed him from one job to another, they'd say. A few jokes about public pubic hairs on Coke cans. Couldn't have been that bad, right? Here she continued. I knew why she'd followed him. By 21, like most women, I'd had experience with the way the world makes excuses for young men and old ones that instead trains its scrutiny on the women who dare to complain. What's your problem? Was it really such a big deal? Come on, it wasn't like he raped you. So that's the tenor of the times that Anita Hill, and at 21 she saw.
But nothing's changed. The attitude has not changed
Except,
whatsoever.
guess what? The joke's on us. There's no such place. Clarence Thomas sits on the Supreme Court, and in the White House sits a man who confessed on tape to how he was, quote, automatically attracted to pretty women and just starts to kiss them when he sees them, and how when you're a star, they let you do it.
Yeah.
Now that president has picked his own Supreme Court nominee, a man who, as a young lawyer, worked with Ken Starr to expose President Bill Clinton's affair with an intern. A man who has now been accused of assaulting a young girl at a party when they were both in high school. A man whom President Trump is defending on social media, tweeting, "I have no doubt if the attack on Dr. Ford was as bad as she says, charges would have been immediately filed with local law enforcement authorities by either her or her loving parents." As a woman, as a loving parent, I am angry. I am beyond angry. That's the tenor of that one article. The Maureen Dowd column says, "Sick to your stomach, me too." the hashtag Me Too, okay?
But you were commenting on the attitude of some of the males involved in this case who say, well, it wasn't rape. Wasn't, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it Billy Graham Jr. who recently said, well, he backed off when she said no, so where's the crime?
Well, okay. I mean, I believe you quoted it to me over the phone that it was Billy Graham.
It was
Jr.
Billy Graham Jr.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is just so absurd. But it's a male attitude, and I've seen it.
This is
In
why
real
Maureen
life.
Dowd's writing, Me Too, sex and power, always intertwined in the capital of Washington, D.C. There is just so many different takes on what this whole debacle is doing to our democracy and to we as
Human beings.
good phrase, moral human beings.
Moral human beings,
So-
absolutely. It's just further erodes my belief in this country.
Well, one of the reasons people are aghast at Brett Kavanaugh being one of the nominees, being the current nominee, is because women have parsed his rulings, and he's always been against women seeking abortion. He's always been in such a way when the case came before him about the immigrant young lady who basically got pregnant by somebody in whatever detention and she needed to get the abortion. He was causing all sorts of delays in his rulings, which was totally overruled by the circuit that he was on. But for him, the delay meant basically she would go past whatever that trimester would be, and she would have to have that child because it had been too late for the abortion. Fortunately, they ruled against him, so she was able to do that. But he's already said in different journals that Roe versus Wade is something that could be overturned because precedent has been overturned by Supreme Court justice in the past. And so there's no doubt that even though he got Susan Collins snowed because she probably wants to be snowed, Susan Collins, the senator from Maine, who seems to think that despite all his writings and everything else he said to the contrary, the fact that he assured her that, oh yes, Roe versus Wade is settled precedent, and so therefore it's quite safe. That's how she's interpreting it. I'm sure he didn't say, of course, it's safe. He said it's settled precedent. But on another breath, out of the other corner of his mouth, he's saying, yes, Supreme Court justices have been known to overturn precedent.
Well, they have.
Well, we know that, because guess what? What was that? Plessy versus Ferguson and stuff like that. The bottom line is, all those slavery rulings that were the law of the land, people said, oh, that wasn't really moral or ethical or right. Let's just make that go away. So somebody in Donald Trump's sphere of influence, because Donald Trump did promise his base that he was going to appoint someone to the Supreme Court who would overthrow Roe versus Wade.
Right.
He came right out and said that. And who did he nominate?
Brett Kavanaugh.
And so our belief, based on the president's statement and some of Brett Kavanaugh's writings, is that, yeah, he would want to overthrow Roe versus Wade. So women's reproductive rights are seriously up in jeopardy with this guy in the White House.
I think so.
So
very much so.
One of the interesting things about this guy in the White House and the people he's appointing to the bench, the highest bench, is that basically they're trying to turn the clock back. They are trying to go back to...
They want to go back to the 50s and the 40s. Yeah,
right.
Sure.
And guess what? I'll do this segue. We got about 3 minutes left or something.
3 minutes left.
Because the bottom line is there are a number of issues that are hot button, that are in the forefront of what's going on in the news today. And basically, just like EVT Educational Productions brings you Media Watch with the good graces of Manhattan Neighborhood Network, right? Well, EVT Educational Productions are the same nonprofit entity that our team of volunteers and collaborators like Raymond, myself, Keith Gonzalez, Bob Anthony, and various and sundry other people, we've decided that there's a 3-act play with music that's worth bringing to the forefront, and so we're now taking it into workshops,
Well,
which
we're in the early stages right now, yeah.
Tightrope, play with music, and the hot button issues. Does a woman have a right to choose, or is abortion a sin? Can love transcend race or racism? Maybe. Maybe
it
not.
can. I would hope that it.
Yeah, there are any number of issues, including the fact that there seems to be an uptick in right-wing racist activities since this orange monster, as you call them, has ascended to the White House. So the workshops for Tightrope are actually going on now, and at some point we may very well do a stage reading within the next month or so, or because we're in September, sometime in October. Yeah,
we're almost there.
And so there may be one more show before we do the actual stage reading, and we'll bring you up to speed on that. But trust me, these issues. The 13th might be the date,
13th.
to that effect. But first, you got to pin down the space for the stage reading, and so that's up in the air right now.
That's another issue.
Yes, that's another whole issue. But nothing comes easy. So
no, it doesn't. Nothing worthwhile at any rate.
Yeah, that's right.
No.
So within the last 42 seconds, what do we need to tell? Oh, but actually, it's a minute and 42, right?
It's actually a minute and 42. Yeah.
So. Brett Kavanaugh may or may not get an up or down vote between the time of this taping and Monday when the show airs.
See us again, yes.
Michael Avenatti's client, let me give you her name one more time.
Which one?
Just because we're senior citizens, we're seriously Miss Swetnick.
Swetnick.
Yes, Miss Swetnick.
Well, okay, 1 minute left.
Miss Swetnick may or may not get a chance to have her story heard by the Senate Judiciary Committee. But we do know that Christine Blasey Ford will be testifying. If there are other witnesses to be called, we certainly are in the dark as we're taping, but I guess we'll find out.
Next Monday, well, we'll have a lot to talk about, I'm sure, during the next show.
So anyway, this has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
And brought to you by EVT Educational Productions and Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And hopefully, we'll catch you the next time.